Hello and welcome to Regulatory Roundup, a recap of recent regulatory changes affecting the European food supplement industry, brought to you by Rubicon Bridge. My name's Lee and I'm joined again by my colleague and in-house regulatory expert, Dan. And it's been a busy month or so, hasn't it?
Yeah.
Since we last spoke.
There's been a lot going on. We've had VitaFoods in the middle as well, so it's been busy for us as a business.
Nice trip to Barcelona.
Yeah, can't complain.
And we were out in Seattle as well, so visiting our friends at Amazon.
Yep.
It's a good trip.
Yeah, really nice trip.
Yeah, and a few more coming as well over the next couple of months. So.
Yeah.
And obviously, very importantly, I'm on holiday as of tomorrow.
Yes, yeah.
And I was thinking, my wife's already started packing. She's obviously in control of everything in our house because she isn't a proper adult. But she does give me one job to do. And my one job is to check that we've got the passports for me and the boys before we leave the house. Because you wouldn't want to get to the airport and find out that actually you can't bring one of your kids on the flight, particularly if they're 7 months old. It could be quite stressful. And
I'm sensing a segue.
Well, I don't know what would make you think that. Well, I was thinking it's almost like going to launch a load of products in a new product and finding out one or more of them you just can't bring on the journey.
I was wondering what the metaphor this week was going to be, but
seamless, right?
Yeah.
And that segue was brought to you by Market Radar, which is a solution that we've developed that helps you can scan multiple products all at the same time and really quickly find out where you can and can't sell them across Europe. So, it has been a busy month or so, and there have been a lot of changes. And one of the things us Brits are conscious of is the effect that Brexit has had on our rules and regulations. Obviously, there was a big reason why it was voted for was because there was a perception that there were too many rules and regulations. And I think it's fair to say post-Brexit, we've seen a little bit of divergence. I know there's been one or two kind of, for us, high-profile precedents set, things like titanium dioxide. Obviously, the EU decided to ban it. The UK has not decided to ban it. But actually, it sounds like we're seeing a movement maybe away from divergence, and that leads us on to the recent SPS agreement. That's the Sanitary and Phytosanitary Agreement between the UK and the EU.
Yep.
And I believe there's some updates on that.
Yeah. So it came out in May last year. It's almost a year ago to the day actually. There's a bit of an Easter egg for when we're filming this one. But yeah, so on the 19th of May last year, there was it announced that there was going to be an agreement between the UK and EU for our SPS sort of rules to be aligned again. So at the time, it wasn't overly clear how much of the industry was going to be impacted by this and how many regulations were going to sort of come into scope. But in the past month, so I think it was about a month ago now, DEFRA published a list of regulations that are, as it stands, going to be in the scope of this SPS agreement. And it's pretty wide-ranging. So you've got everything from general food law, FIC, so the food labelling regulation, right through to sort of specific directives like the Food Supplement Directive, things on honey, additives, flavourings, and so on. It's almost like you name it, there is going to be it's likely to be aligned between the UK and EU.
So that's the emphasis behind the agreement, to try and move the UK closer to the EU.
Yeah, exactly. The idea is that food trade has been really difficult since Brexit. I mean, I think there are some sort of notorious examples as well, like sausages haven't been able to be exported to Europe.
Poor Europe.
Yeah, they're missing out.
They really are.
So, like, no Lincolnshires. So there's a big they're missing out really, but also it's a challenge for the internal market. Because you've obviously got Northern Ireland, which is, on the island of Ireland, and you can't have a hard border there. So the trade between Great Britain and Northern Ireland has been impacted. So there's a lot of factors at play, but the overall case is that it will simplify trade. And it should save money for businesses. So things like EHCs won't be needed anymore, and that they cost around £200 per consignment. So that's quite a significant saving if you're doing a lot of export.
Yeah.
So there's a lot of benefits, but then of course it does bring into question, well, we left the EU to go our own way in a lot of aspects, and we're now going to be going into sort of we're back in it from a food perspective.
So if you're a UK business that trades in just the UK, will it still affect you?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So what we're anticipating at the moment, it's still a little bit up in the air. There's no clear guidance as to what's going to happen yet. But what it looks like is that we're going to have to follow European rules on all of these things, which means that titanium dioxide will be banned.
Yeah.
And there will be a few other cases like that as well.
Okay. So I guess if you're a UK business, whether you're trading in the UK or the EU, you need to keep abreast of those changes. And presumably if you're a European business and you're trading with the UK, likewise, you need to keep up to date with those ones.
Yeah. And I think one thing to really keep an eye on is going to be the transition periods here.
Right.
So there is, DEFRA have said the scope for there to be a transition period. So there should be ample time to change formulations and labelling if you need to. But one concern that we're hearing from the food supplement industry is our products have a really long shelf life. You know, they're sometimes 3 years, sometimes 5 years. And is a transition period actually going to be that lenient to allow for sell-through of those products?
Okay.
So it's really key for businesses to jump on this early when the change comes. And on that's something that our change management function is really good at. We can almost tell people the impacts of massive regulatory changes like this instantly by looking at their data and our data and assessing the impact.
Yeah, that's
scale.
a major benefit of our solutions, isn't it? It doesn't just help you get to market quicker, but it helps you stay in market and keep ahead of those regulatory changes.
Yeah, exactly.
So speaking of regulatory changes, I know there's been a few kind of major updates in the novel foods application world or that process. Yeah. So a couple of ingredients that have been looked at specifically, alpha GPC and NMN.
Yes. So both of them are ingredients we see quite a lot in formulations that we're assessing from that are coming over from the US.
Yeah.
And I think NMN particularly is a really kind of hot ingredient, especially on things like TikTok and social media. I think for like an anti-aging and sort of recovery aspect. But both of them have just had positive safety assessments from EFSA. So that means they're very likely to be approved in the coming months. So they can actually be used. They've been on the market though for some time, but that just highlights the lack of enforcement that we're seeing on novel foods in retail and on social commerce.
And speaking about a lack of enforcement, there was an article in the Times that I saw your wonderful post on LinkedIn with the Cowboy Dan.
Yeah, compliance cowboy.
And as you know, I'm not an avid reader, but I got the gist of the article, and it was alluding to whether the wellness industry and food supplements specifically, comparing it to the Wild West and saying that it was an unregulated category, and I think specifically calling out that it was less regulated than pet food.
Yes. It's something that I think everyone in the supplement industry will have seen time and time again. There is a view that the industry just isn't regulated well enough. And I think the article was interesting because it was obviously peddling that narrative, which comes time and time again, but it was also being pushed by companies within the industry. So there was one brand who was interviewed, and they were saying they were the brand that said there was more regulation for pet food than there was for supplements. And then they were advocating almost seemingly for more regulation. You know, that's the implication, isn't it? We're not well regulated enough. We need more regulation. So then you'd ask, what regulations do you think we're missing? We in the food industry have regulations that start right in the field. You've got regulations on pesticides that you can use. You then have regulations on, say, if you had a collagen from beef. You know, there's regulations on pharmacological contaminants, so limits on antibiotics or anything that you might use in an animal that can reach the food chain. You then have obviously formulation-dependent things like the Novel Food Framework and additives and so on. And
there's almost like catch-alls for specific ingredients that might not be individually regulated. We have catch-alls for that.
Yeah.
So I don't think there's really any gaps, is there?
No, it's an incredibly well-regulated industry.
Yeah.
And I think what I am perhaps wondering has happened is people are looking very one-dimensional and saying, well, we've only got one regulation specific to food supplements, in the UK, the Food Supplement Regulation, or the directive in the EU. But that seems to just overlook all the rest of food regulation, which still applies to supplements because they are part of food. So I'd almost argue that the more worrying thing in there, in that whole article, was that you've got a food business that either doesn't know that there's all these regulations exist, or is just not really following them.
Presumably that the brand that were featured in the article, presumably they've got their house in order, and I'm guessing.
So the article sort of talked about that, and it also touched upon ASA challenges on advertising adverts in the past year, and kind of said there's been 19 ASA rulings against supplement brands, and it touched on a few different things like prostate health and menopause, ADHD, things that we're seeing time and time again. And as you say, you'd expect the brands that were involved in the article, so there were 4 brands in total, to all have the house in order. They didn't, unsurprisingly. So pretty quickly on each of those brands' websites, you can see that they're making all these claims that they're also fighting against in this article.
Yeah,
it's almost like saying there's a really unregulated industry out there. You need to sort it, but don't look at us, because we're fighting the good fight.
But they're probably not aware that they're not actually complying.
Potentially.
And I also think whenever you get somebody who doesn't work in regs talking about regs, they don't really understand some of the nuances. Like, it is a heavily regulated industry. It's not a heavily enforced industry.
Yeah.
And I think that's probably the important thing, which I think they have a point on.
Yeah, I think enforcement is lacking, and I think that just comes down to perhaps underfunding in each of the government departments. The scale of the problem is massive now.
Yeah.
You're no longer dealing with just one high street retailer with a very limited shelf space. You've got Amazon and TikTok and eBay all selling supplements, and the volume has just exploded.
Yeah.
And when you're talking about claims, there are so many more avenues that you can advertise down. It's not just TV and print. You've got influencer marketing. So I see the frustration, and I think it is frustrating as a brand to see other people doing things that you can't do, but they're not getting picked up on it.
I think it's frustrating for the brands that are playing by the rules. I think it's really confusing for the brands that are looking to enter the market. So obviously we were out in Seattle last month.
Yeah.
And the main reason we were there is because Amazon have got this real focus around bringing brilliant US brands to Europe. And I'm very fortunate. I get to speak to all sorts of really cool brands and hear their plans. And quite often the conversation will go something like, we're really excited to bring the brand to Europe, but we know that if we do it with Amazon, we have to go through all of these regulatory hurdles. Whereas in the UK, we have a seemingly quite popular online retailer that is not playing by any of the rules whatsoever. And so the conversation is, why would I grow my business with Amazon in Europe versus this alternative where I don't have to play by any of the rules? My products can be illegal, they can be illegally marketed, and that retailer will sell them, and apparently that's completely fine. And the pushback that I always give is that retailer is playing with fire, and if you want to launch your products really quickly, then yeah, sure, go with them. You'll be able to launch your products quicker. But if you want to grow your business in a sustainable way, they will get in trouble, and eventually they'll probably not be able to sell any products in the UK. That's the likely outcome of that. So if you want to actually grow your business, don't look at Amazon as being like the bad guys. They're not being the bad guys. They're actually being the good guys, because they're helping you grow your business in a sustainable way. Yeah.
I genuinely think Amazon have done more for compliance and regulation in the EU than almost anybody over the past few years.
In an industry that is not well enforced, they're probably the biggest enforcer.
Yeah.
Which I think is good. I think we've seen a lot of positive change.
Yeah. And I think they come under a lot of flack. For, you can find some non-compliant products on there, but the scale of the problem they're dealing with, I think they're doing a relatively good job with the scale, the size of their problem.
And they're having to navigate the regulatory complexity across Europe for themselves. They get contacted directly by regulatory authorities, and sometimes the nature of those challenges are not necessarily in line with our understanding of the regulatory requirements.
Yep.
And what that can result in, because they're then just responding to a challenge from a regulator. So they're not going to challenge back on that. They're going to apologise and build policies around that to make sure that they don't fall into that trap again in the future. But from the outside looking in, the perception is that Amazon have all these additional requirements.
Yeah.
But it's not the reality.
No, they're led by, as you say, they're led by authority interactions. And they do have some sort of general proactive upstream controls as well. But if you ever look into their sort of ingredient-specific controls, like they have limits on melatonin, which are pretty much aligned to national limits as well. But they also have some that don't seem to make much sense. We were dealing with one over the past year where an ingredient called Damiana, which is a plant ingredient, was banned in Germany on Amazon Germany. And we couldn't really understand why. It's in the BVL plant list. It doesn't list any restrictions there. So to all intents and purposes, it seems permitted. When you actually get into a conversation with Amazon on this, it transpires that the ban was because they thought people would smoke it and get high, which maybe you can, I don't know. But it's pretty ludicrous when you're dealing with a tablet food supplement.
Yeah.
That risk is not there anymore. So you surely don't need to have that restriction in place in that case.
Yeah, but I think people forget they're a business and they like to make money. So they're not introducing rules for the sake of not making money. That doesn't make any sense whatsoever.
Yeah.
They're either responding to some kind of regulatory contact from an authority or some kind of signal, be it like a serious complaint or a recall or something that makes them feel like that ingredient is unsafe. The good thing, and I think one of the benefits of our, I would say, really positive relationship with Amazon is that they're open to that dialogue and they're open to reviewing that decision. You kind of touched on their two recent changes to their policies. So in Germany, they've updated their upper level on melatonin, and that's increased to...
Yeah, so it was previously at 0.5, which just wasn't really representative of the market. And they've increased that to 1 milligram now.
Right. So that's good news for people selling melatonin in Germany or planning to.
Yeah, really positive. And 1 milligram is really what you see in the market. I think there's a committee on borderline substances in Germany, and they are reviewing melatonin. You keep seeing in their meeting minutes that their opinion on melatonin is kind of moving through. So there might be a bit more of an update there. But a milligram is representative. And then the other one that they've obviously changed is Damiana. So, as I say, it used to be prohibited on Amazon Germany, and they've now opened up an exception for food supplements that contain it, right, which just reflects the risk that you've got with that ingredient.
Okay. So I guess two kind of key pieces of information on the Damiana. If you're looking to sell that as an ingredient within a food supplement in Germany, you're okay to do that. I'd say, just given what we know about Amazon's controls and how they identify ingredients and things like that, there's a chance that your product might still get suppressed. But it's important that in your defense, you make it really clear that you're marketing it as a food supplement and not a food.
Yeah.
Okay. So obviously Damiana, that was on the back of some, we assume some safety concerns that had been reported to Amazon. Food supplements are generally really safe. And I think a lot of times we forget that the reason we have regulations is to protect consumers. And I did see the article that was reported by the BBC. There was obviously a really sad incident involving a 7-year-old child who was poisoned through taking a vitamin D supplement. Yeah.
So in that case, there was as you say, there was a child that was poisoned from a vitamin D supplement. I think they'd had some sort of blood tests at the start of this story where they were slightly deficient in vitamin D, so they were prescribed a relatively high dose vitamin D supplement, which just isn't unusual. And over the few weeks where they were taking the product, they became more and more unwell, and doctors weren't really sure what was up with them. And eventually someone said, well, did you hear about the sort of contaminated batch of supplement? And they actually looked into it, and he was taking this product that had actually been recalled. So the recall was because it contained 7 times the declared dose. So you're expecting to take X micrograms of vitamin D and you're actually taking Y micrograms. So there's obviously a safety concern there. But there was a recall in place. From the article, there's then a lot of people jumping on that same bandwagon of food supplements aren't regulated and they should be brought under the control of the MHRA, which I really disagree with, especially in that case. Yes, there was a lot of harm done, and I think my heart goes out to that child and their family. But I think there was a recall in the UK,
and it was a quality issue.
There was a quality issue,
and there are regulations in place controlling vitamin D in the UK.
Yes, yeah. But what really fell down was, so the Food Standards Agency in England and Wales issued a recall. Food Standards Scotland, it essentially fell down in their process. It seems that the recall got lost. And then when you've got a pharmacy saying, well, we weren't aware of it, and if this was a medicine, we would have been aware of it, you've got to say, well, you're a business that's selling goods, and you need to understand the regulations that surround the goods you're selling. And if that's medicines, sure. If that's food, you need to understand food regulation. You need to be aware of food recalls.
Yeah.
So I don't think this is a failing of the supplement industry necessarily.
No.
I think there's a quality failing there, obviously, but there's also a process failing that people aren't picking up on recall measures and then removing that product from stock.
Yeah. I think it's a reminder on the importance of food safety and having all of those controls in place and treating them with the respect that they deserve. I think it's also a reminder that these are food supplements that are very safe, but there's a reason why we have these upper levels and maximum permitted levels and all these controls in place. And that's because when taking at dosages that exceed safe levels, the repercussions are serious.
Yeah, people can get hurt.
Yeah.
And ultimately, food regulation is there to protect people's health.
Yeah.
So non-compliance can lead to harmful effects.
Something that it seems like the whole world is talking about, and I've actually really been looking forward to talking to you about, is GLP-1. Not the drugs per se, because obviously they're taking over the weight loss industry, and I think it's probably a separate discussion on the efficacy and things like that, but they seem to be helping a lot of people. And as a consequence of that, the food supplement industry has responded, and we're now seeing products marketed specifically for people who are taking GLP-1, the drug. I think there's actually kind of 2 camps here, one of which I feel is kind of defendable. The other one is not defendable to my knowledge. But the first one is supplements that are intended, because I think there's a known, albeit maybe not quantified and like fully established repercussion of taking GLP-1s, that you do end up taking in less essential nutrients. So the first camp of supplements are supplements that are marketed, intended to help people who are taking that drug to replenish those nutrients. I think that's one thing.
Yeah.
A completely different other thing is supplements that are marketing themselves as having a GLP-1 type effect.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. They are the 2 ways we're seeing supplements be marketed at the moment. And I think both avenues have quite serious sort of regulatory concerns at the moment. So the easiest one to talk about is probably the supplements that are claiming to have a GLP-1 like effect. So there was an ASA ruling in the past month or so where a brand the brand name was a play on words of GLP-1, which is already quite high risk, were making comparisons of their supplement to the actual GLP-1 medicines. So they were comparing them to injections and saying, you don't need to inject this, you can just take this supplement instead. So that's comparing your product to a medicine, and very quickly a consumer is going to think, well, that's going to work in the same way, that's going to be effective. Therefore, the overall view of the product is that's a medicine. And the MHRA will come down on you on that. So those claims were challenged, and that challenge was upheld as medicinal claims. And there have been in the past some people who were trying to use prefixes of their supplement names, like sema for semaglutide, or making plays on words like that to kind of imply that their product is going to have that action. So yeah, just stay away from those sort of claims. Anything where you're comparing it to the actual injections, you're just going to be getting into trouble.
And the other type of products, the ones that are kind of intended to help support someone's nutritional intake when they're taking those drugs, I assume that's an issue because we just don't have the data as to what those requirements are.
Yeah, that's another problem. So I think firstly, it's worth saying for those products, if you mention GLP-1 on your packaging or in your advertising, there's a good chance you'll get picked up by Amazon or by the ASA. So the ASA are using their active ad monitoring system, so it's AI that's going out and looking for keywords. And I highly suspect they're looking for GLP-1. It's a pretty easy term to look for, and if you have that in your advertising, it could go one of those ways.
Yeah,
you're talking about it. And I suspect Amazon will probably delist you for it as well. Then whether or not you can talk about it is a separate question. So the health claims regulation does allow for claims on satiety, so feelings of fullness, and weight reduction. So arguably, when you're talking about this product can make you feel full, it can help you with weight loss, that is a health claim, not a medicinal claim.
It's konjac fibre.
So konjac, glucomannan, there is a weight reduction claim. What you can't talk about is the weight of weight loss or anything like that. That's prohibited. But there aren't any authorised health claims for any of these ingredients to do with fullness or weight reduction. So then you're getting into the territory of an unauthorised health claim. Then the second problem, if you're talking about a product where you're trying to fulfill the nutritional needs of someone who's on GLP-1, is, are you actually fulfilling their nutritional needs? And there's a Dutch advertising board who submitted an opinion on this, I think it was just at the end of April, so really recently. And their conclusion was that the science isn't understood well enough yet for us to actually say this product is going to support people on GLP-1. So their view is you can't make a claim that your product's going to support someone on GLP-1 because there isn't enough evidence yet. Whether a brand feels they have that is a separate question. It might be that advertising board just isn't party to the evidence and therefore can't make a decision. Yeah. But if they were provided with enough evidence, perhaps you could make that claim.
I remember a really interesting presentation that we both saw at one of the food supplement conferences. It was our friend Manfred.
Yes.
And he was talking about, I think, is it foods with special medical purposes or something?
Yeah.
Is it more likely that second type of product would fall under that category? Or is it completely different? Because I always get confused between the...
Good question. So food for special medical purposes is foods that for when you can't fulfill a particular nutritional need through diet alone. So I don't know for certain if that would actually apply to them or not. I think we'd have to get our friend Manfred on.
Maybe we'll fly him out.
Yeah.
That'd be nice.
Yeah.
So we touched on the ASA and them using AI, obviously, but it's not the only way that they kind of collate information about potential non-compliances. And I saw, was it in March, there was an interesting case that was actually reported to the ASA by a regulatory consultancy.
Yes. So there was a ASA ruling against Humantra, who are a electrolyte brand. And they were making claims to do with hydration. And they were picked up on hydration being an unapproved health claim. Well, there is an argument that you could defend it against a health claim, but they weren't defending it against the right health claim. Their product didn't meet the conditions. And that claim would be the carbohydrate electrolyte solutions and water uptake. So we've spoken to trading standards on this, and their view is that that's an acceptable defence for a hydration claim. But yeah, Humantra weren't making that particular claim and didn't meet the condition. But I think more interesting in this is that this was a regulatory consultant, not us for the record, who'd complained, and it mentioned that in the ASA ruling, which I suppose, makes you question at what point do you step in the industry.
I think we might have different opinions on this, because I think it's the right thing to do. I think if you're operating in an industry and you're seeing unsafe products, you have a responsibility to report that.
Yeah, and I'd agree there. I think an unsafe product is unsafe.
Yeah.
But then there is the argument that any unapproved additive, novel food, anything like that is technically unsafe. So you could report every NMN supplement on the market. Maybe
we would help the ASA out if we did that.
Then the question is, would they have the workload to deal with it? And I suspect not.
I reckon there's a few things they have to straddle, because I think if they're using AI now, we know they're scanning thousands and thousands of products. They're likely getting lots and lots of reports as well.
Yeah.
I think they have to straddle the line of, well, firstly, they probably have limited resource, because it's still human beings making the decision to do a ruling. I think the other side is they probably don't want to destroy a market or an industry.
Yeah. It's how heavy do you go in?
Yeah.
And do you only go for the ingredients that have, definite novel food status, or do you then go after the ones that have very likely novel food status? There's an ingredient that had a negative safety assessment in Belgium recently. It was already a novel food. So Fedogia, it's probably butchered the pronunciation.
Fedogia.
Yeah. Okay. But it's a botanical and it's a novel food, and there was a determination on it a year ago. But before that determination came in, would you be right to challenge it? Probably.
Yeah.
Because if there's no evidence that it's not novel, you should have challenged it beforehand. But then it's still all over the market. So I think we could find a very, very, very long list of supplements that would be technically unsafe because they haven't been proven to be safe. But that's, I think, different to, undeclared allergens. And it was interesting, one of the products that was involved in that Times article actually had undeclared allergens. Well, they declared them, but they hadn't bolded them. And you're talking about £1 billion company.
Yeah.
Who can't bold an allergen.
Own goal.
Yeah, but it's quite that's a real safety risk if you're allergic to soy. Everyone's familiar with the case in the past few years in the media.
Yeah.
It has really serious impacts, but there in the national newspaper as a good guy.
Because in the US, as I understand it, it's obviously very litigious, and you get lots of brands suing other brands.
Yeah.
And I wonder if that, now we've got regulatory consultants reporting on brands that they're presumably not working with, but they'll be working with. I wonder what they're getting out of it.
I suppose that's maybe they're working with one of the competitors. So that consultant might have been working with Humantra's competitor and thought, this is worthwhile challenging because I've told this brand they can't do it. They've perhaps turned around and said, well, they're doing it. And they've said, well, watch and see, maybe. Or it might just be that they're, fighting the good fight and want to clean up the market. But it's really difficult
to clean up all those bad cowboys. Yeah. All right, thanks, Dan. And thank you for listening. I think that's all we've got time for today. If you haven't already, subscribe to us on YouTube, follow us on LinkedIn, and we look forward to seeing you again soon.